Hi, my name is Jessica Vicencio, and I'm going to be going over the book that I chose, which is The Big Short, Inside the Doomsday Machine by Michael Lewis. And if you haven't heard of the book, a familiar movie is called The Big Short with Christian Bale. I think that one gives a good depiction of what happened. This is about the 2008 financial crisis, the market collapse. I feel like this event ties into what we've been learning. And I focused on overconfidence for the report because I feel like there's a lot of tie ins with chapter six. The book is essentially about the US housing market and everything that went wrong leading up to the crisis. So, all the red flags that were happening, all the decisions that were being made by Wall Street. Wall Street really played a huge part in the collapse. Essentially, what they were doing is encouraging banks to give out risky home loans, and there was no criteria. There was nothing that borrowers needed to meet as far as like income and credit. And, they were turning a blind eye and basically just giving the loans out to anyone. And because of that, there was a flood of just high risk loans going out. And they were handing out the loans like candy. They were handing it out to people who didn't have good credit, and essentially they were bundling these loans into what they called mortgage-backed securities. And they then sold the loans to investors, and then the investors were made to believe that these are really safe investments. And so it just continued to go and go and go. But of course, essentially, they hit a roadblock because borrowers were now not paying back the loans. So essentially, the whole thing collapsed. And, the book really gave a lot of insight on how the whole thing's unfortunate, but the intention was initially, a good idea in the sense that the mortgage bond market was supposed to give the opportunity for everyone to experience home ownership and basically live that American dream. And it just wasn't that anymore. It was something that was ran by greed and focused on profit. And I think that Wall Street really played a really huge role in this. So it really spiraled out of control. I feel like the overconfidence really shows in Wall Street executives and how they handled everything. The fact that they felt that they figured out this system where they could continue to give out high risk loans. I mean, if you think about that today, it's very insane. Just we know how the housing market has been, especially after the pandemic. But bundling these risky mortgages and thinking that it's safe and that there's no consequence, it's really a miscalibration. And that's something that I took from the text, is that it's not something that is reliable. It's not dependable. It's not something with longevity. So I feel like they believed that they were a lot smarter than the risks that they were taking. And the book talks about how they essentially even try to change the language of the loans. These were subprime loans, and they were changed to just the slightest change of mid-prime loans. And that's just to make it sound less risky and for people to feel more comfortable to, continue to invest. And they're just putting a new label on to a product that is, essentially they're both the same. And that's the funny thing on how they sold it. So a lot of excessive optimism too. I feel like they thought that they were untouchable, that nothing would come from this. I mean, they had a lot of red flags between the beginning, middle, and end. People eventually started missing their payments, and instead of collecting data and kind of saying, hey, how many financial institutions have mortgage loans out where there's no payments coming in? They didn't stop and look at the data. They didn't stop and do an analysis, a check in, something to see what's going on. So I feel like they thought it would just work out and that the more loans that they give out, like it'll all fall into place. I think that's where that illusion of control kind of comes in, where they thought that they could really control this massive strategy, this massive system that they had in place. And of course, it just eventually collapsed. So I really feel like this event, the crisis, it's really unfortunate. I feel like it was a really huge learning opportunity for the country, for hopefully Wall Street. But it did have a lot of concepts in there: the miscalibration, excessive optimism, and the illusion of control. I think those really stood out to me. And I feel like those are a lot of biases. They're cognitive biases that lead people and institutions to make risky decisions without thinking of the consequences. So The Big Short really elaborates on that, and it really talks about all the details and what exactly they were doing that were extremely misleading, all the red flags, and how much it really cost people. And ultimately, that's what led to the 2008 financial crisis.